Hard is not the absence of good. I had a one thing planned for us today, but that might be the one instead. Today we're talking about following Jesus in the Wasteland, part 3. And first I want to start with a story that is honestly kind of difficult, like the one Ray just shared. 3 months ago, I did a funeral for a really good friend of mine from high school who lost his battle with substance use. And, standing in that, and it happened, I got the news right as I was supposed to go on a little bit of retreat. And it just reminded me that sometimes I feel like there's no retreat in this world. There's no space to rest. And, Ray was sharing how he lost another friend from the same, disease. And it just reminds us that we're in a wasteland. Right here locally, I know recently we've been talking about big national social events, as we should. But I find for a lot of people, what's going on like right here, right around them, is that's what's really going on. That's what they're struggling with. We're reminded it's a hard place to live. Wasteland. It's like a farm field that's been farmed forever, but all of a sudden it's not workable anymore. Or it's an emotional and spiritual wasteland where it's hard to exist. When my friend died and I was at his funeral, doing his funeral, that's what I felt. And yet in the wasteland, there are glimpses and whispers of the new life. Of Jubilee, which is something we're going to talk about today. My friend's dad told a story. I'd never heard about the guy. In a way, it felt like it was uncharacteristic of the guy, but upon reflection, it wasn't. He told a story about when my friend was in McDonald's and he saw a mother and a son were struggling with homelessness. And he was moved. And he went up to them and said, "Hey, I want to buy you anything that you want on the menu." And he did. And he called his dad afterwards and told him the story. And his dad, God love him, is a hillbilly. It's not like his dad to tell such a story, but he's choking back tears talking about his son. And he remembers his son saying, "Dad, I felt so good." And his dad said back to him, choking back tears as he's telling the story, "It's because it's what you were supposed to do." And that's what struck me in the story. Two guys who would not consider themselves religious. They're wrestlers, people who believe in God, but they don't know what that really means for what they do day to day, because they can't find a space to fit in a church. Religion seems a little kind of out of sorts for them. And yet his dad still says to him, "That's what you were supposed to do." And it reminded me of a couple things. My friend was battling his disease. He wasn't just taking it sitting down. He was fighting. But it reminds me of this concept of this thing we call grace in our tradition. That even as we're maybe, it seems we're running away from God. In our tradition, we believe that God is still whispering. There's still a candle, a flame inside us. God always chasing after us. God always planting within us a vision of how things should be. A vision of the kingdom of heaven, a vision of faith, a vision of new life. Son, it's because of what you were supposed to do. There's a joy like we never experience when our lives are aligned with God, with the whispers and glimpses of the new life. And we're talking about, how do you pursue that in the wasteland, though? When constantly you're bombarded with this world, this life that seems unlivable in many ways, joy that seems impossible to discover. Well, today I want to plant something in your mind and in your heart. I hope that you're ready to do some spiritual and mental working out today. Yes, we want this to be a place of rest. We hope that you experience comfort that only God can give today. But we're not here to entertain. I'm going to be really blunt. I don't typically speak this way, but I think that churches that are in the business of entertaining aren't helping their people. I think they're giving people something to escape, not to live well in the wasteland. We're here to challenge, too, to be instructed and to live differently. So I want to plant in your head and your heart today this vision from the Bible, a term called Jubilee. Because we're talking about today how even in the wasteland, especially in the wasteland, Jesus gives us a vision of Jubilee and calls us to believe in Him and follow Him to bring that vision to life, to fruition. That's what the forgiveness of Jesus is for. That's what the healing is for. That's what the new life is for, so that we join Jesus in the only mission that's worth living for. The possibility of Jubilee. If we were together right now, I'd have you turn to your neighbor and say Jubilee, and you would roll your eyes at me. So you can do it at home and still roll your eyes at me if you want. But here's what I want to do. I want to teach you what this vision is for a couple reasons. One, I want to show you that the Bible is like this beautiful painting, where the library of books that is the Bible, they all hang together and paint this comprehensive vision of what it's all for. And Jesus comes to fulfill that. He comes to initiate something new on one hand and invite us into it, and also to start to finish something. I want to show you that like something gets talked about here in the beginning and gets picked up all the way through and mentioned again towards the end. What in the world is Jubilee? Have you ever heard of that? I'd be interested. Those of you who are out there, if you haven't grown up in the church, good for you. I wish I were in your shoes sometimes. I wish I could hear things as for the first time. One of the things that those of us who grew up in the church, we feel like we need to unload from ourselves is the baggage that continues to keep us down from religious folks. But let's see here in the comments, have you ever heard the term Jubilee from the Bible? You ever heard in church? Amanda says her mom has heard of Jubilee, the biblical concept of Jubilee. What about you, Amanda? Would you be willing to share that? My sister says, I just heard about it in the Bible and I was totally confused. My wife says she's heard the word but never heard a sermon, never dug into the meaning. It's crazy to me. Evelyn, thanks for sharing. Evelyn says, honestly, no. Ray, have you ever heard that term?
I've heard it, but I don't know the actual definition.
Ray's pretty biblically smart. And he says he hasn't heard of it. I don't think a lot of folks have. Anybody else? Have you heard of that term before? Sue says nope. Haven't heard of it. That was my kid. I got it. Amanda, I thought your mom was with you. Christy, I've heard of it, but never understood the full meaning. Ashley says no. Oh my gosh, Michael Benson. That's it. That's what we're going after today. Oh man. I'm going to grab a drink of coffee. I'm telling you, I want to get this vision into your head and your heart today. I bet your mom has too, Maureen. It is something that gets talked about in Leviticus, gets talked about in the prophets, and then Jesus says in the beginning of Luke, it's what he's come to bring about. Can you believe it? It's one of the main things in the Bible, and yet we've heard so little about it. How does that happen? Because we live in a wasteland. Even the church is subject to the temptations and the influence of the wasteland we exist in. We latch on to concepts that aren't the heart of the matter. Dad's onto something. It happens every 50 years. So listen to this. I'm going to give you a summary from Leviticus. I hope you're ready. We're going to work out a little bit together. Give you a summary from Leviticus. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. It's the third book of the Bible, an ancient book of the Bible. From the section called the instruction given to God's people after they'd been rescued from slavery in Egypt and were traveling in the wilderness. God gave them this vision in the wasteland after slavery. But I'm just summarizing it for you from, look, it's just a study Bible. It's no commentary. You don't got to be an expert. You can just get a study Bible. I didn't get this from my schooling. If you want to read about it, it's in Leviticus 25. Third book in the Bible. So check it out. Leviticus describes the Jubilee year as a time for restoring people and land to their original state after Israel settled the land of Canaan. Listen to this. This was supposed to happen every 50 years. We have no evidence that it ever actually happened. People must return to their original homes. Slaves must be freed. Land must be restored to its original owners, and land must not be planted or harvested. Deuteronomy lets slaves go free every 7 years during the sabbatical year when debts are also forgiven. Listen to this. These rules have the effect of keeping someone from buying land or a fellow Israelite outright. Instead, they can only rent the land or the person's labor for a set period of time until the Jubilee or sabbatical year. Here, if you missed all that, if you're like, Ross, I'm totally lost and bored right now, listen. These rules emphasize that both land and people belong to the Lord, and so they cannot be bought and sold permanently. The Jubilee expresses the wish that Israel will remain just as it was in the time of Joshua. These rules were hard to keep through the changing fortunes of history. There is no record in the Bible or other ancient texts of Israelites actually observing the Jubilee. But the ideal of Jubilee has stimulated many later attempts to reform society for the better by, for example, banning slavery and reducing debts. It was like a reset or a restoration period every 50 years where everything gets reset. Land is released. Slaves are released. All right. That's at the very beginning of the Bible. Go to the prophets. I'm in Isaiah. This is centuries later. A prophet after Israel has been destroyed and conquered. God gives the vision of Jubilee again. Isaiah 61. Again, this is in the section of the Old Testament, part of the Bible that comes before Jesus. It's people imagining how to get things back to where they're supposed to be, or to go into a future that's God's future. Isaiah chapter 61 says, "The Lord God's Spirit is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the poor, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim release for captives and liberation for prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor," aka Jubilee. When someone said they were proclaiming the year of the Lord's favor, that meant Jubilee. The prophet says, we got to get back to that. We're supposed to be a people that's a light to the nations, to bring good news to the poor. to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim release for captives and liberation for prisoners. Ross, what's that got to do with us? Well, Jesus says it has everything to do with us. Proof? You're going to hear something that sounds real familiar right now. Luke chapter 4, the Gospel of Luke, about Jesus' life. After Jesus goes through the desert, we talked about last week, the wasteland, he returned in the power of the Spirit to Galilee, and news about him spread throughout the whole countryside. He taught in their synagogues and was praised by everyone. He went to Nazareth, where he had been raised. On the Sabbath, he went to the synagogue as he normally did, stood up and read. The synagogue assistant gave him the scroll from the prophet Isaiah. Guess what he read about? He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has sent me to preach good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the prisoners, and recovery of sight to the blind, to liberate the oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." A little bit further down the line, he said, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled, just as you heard it." AKA, translation, Jesus' whole mission is to bring Jubilee to the earth. That's what it's all for. Even in the wasteland, Jesus himself just got out of the wasteland, and he announces that. So listen, the Bible's a beautiful portrait. It's not, you can't dissect it. You can't cut it up like you're doing an autopsy on a dead body. The Bible's a living, breathing thing. Yes, scroll drop. That's for the win right there. In Leviticus, in the very beginning, God announces Jubilee in the desert. It says, be a people of Jubilee there. Isaiah, a wilderness. Israel's been conquered by the Assyrians, conquered by the Babylonians eventually. Everything is laid to waste. God announces Jubilee again. The ice machine's going. Jesus gets out of the wilderness, and what does he announce? Jubilee. He says that's what it's all for. That's what the forgiveness of Christ is for. It's what the healing is for. It's what the comfort is for. It's the new life, what we're all for, that we would be people who, if I could say it again, who join Jesus in preaching good news to the poor, release to the prisoners, recovery of sight to the blind, to liberate the oppressed, to restore things, to renew things. Jesus announces in Revelation, in John's vision, "Behold, I'm making all things new." Why am I saying all this? Though you may be mired in the wasteland, know this: God is bringing Jubilee into the wasteland. And here's the hard part, through you and me. Yeah. That's why we're witnesses. That's why Jesus came to earth, not to say, here's an escape pod. Get into the escape pod so we can get out of the wasteland. No, he said, hey, remember what God announced way back there? I'm bringing it right now. But of course, any good, rational person would say, Ross, I see no evidence of that anywhere. In fact, I was talking with a group recently about how one of the criticisms of Christianity is I don't see any of that. In fact, it seems to me like Christians are making the wasteland worse. We got a good track record for that. There are many things that are insufficient remedies to our wasteland. That's a decent criticism of us, but maybe it's because you and me as human beings, as we live in the wasteland, we look for remedies that aren't redemptive. We look for healing that doesn't help. We misconstrue what Jesus is really about. And it's built sometimes into the fabric of our culture. I love America, but sometimes our culture is all about individualism. Like Jesus came to save me. It's all about me. Like Jesus came to forgive my sins so my soul can go to heaven. No, Jesus came to save the entire world, to renew the entire cosmos, and you and me. It's not about you, but it is about you and the whole world. How Jesus is renewing it all, renewing you from the inside out, forgiving. Well, I don't care how long your rap sheet is, it's all forgiven. You got to receive that gift. You're not alone. Jesus is with you. That's what Christmas is about. God is with us. God gives you the gift of the Holy Spirit as you set out to follow Jesus. But all those gifts, all those things are so that we would join in the Jubilee work and know that even in the wasteland, though we may not see it, we may not feel it, we're working with Jesus to bring Jubilee to life, to make it a truth. Another insufficient remedy we go for is something I'm going to call today, and many other people have used the word. I said, I hope your mind's on today. Tribalism. When we choose a tribe and say, these are my people, this is where I work, this is where I agree with people. These are people who think like me, talk like me, look like me, and that's going to be my remedy for life. Is I'm going to hang out with my tribe. I'm going to say that tribe over there is of the devil. We need to purge them from our society. In Jesus, there are no tribes. In fact, a vision from Isaiah is that God does not send the Messiah just for one tribe or the tribes of Israel. In fact, Isaiah 49 says that God's people are meant to be a light to the nations. God comes for Israel and the Gentiles, for the whole world. God doesn't have a nation. I've heard on Twitter recently, God doesn't have a political party, God has a people. When you lean into tribalism, you're leaning away from Jesus. You're leaning into a remedy that's not redemptive. You're leaning into some sort of healing that isn't helpful. I said it a couple weeks ago. If you follow Jesus, that means you are an equal opportunity critic of every politician and every political party, and your allegiance is not first to country, it is to the kingdom of heaven. So that means every day you wake up and repent of saying my identity is with this or that tribe. You don't have any tribe except for the tribe of Jesus' grace. When you lean into Jesus, you're leaning into grace. You're leaning into the power of the Spirit and resurrection, and you're joining Him in the work of Jubilee. When you can't see it, you can't feel it. You still show up, and you see people as masterpieces made for the Jubilee work. The restoration of all things, the release of captives, the liberation of the oppressed, healing for the nations. Well, so what? You might be saying, that's all fine and dandy. Sounds good. How do I actually do it? Tell us in the comments. What's that look like day to day? To follow Jesus in the wasteland, to put your whole trust in Jesus, and to believe that your life, this whole world, is destined for Jubilee. What's that look like day to day? Anybody, can you help out with this? What does it mean we do day to day? As you're thinking and commenting, please comment. Tell us, what's a small thing you can do? One is this, like I said, believing that church happens in restaurants, not just sanctuaries. Seeing every person that you interact with as God's masterpiece, destined for grace as much as you. Angela says, remain in relationship with people even when it's hard. Ray said it. Hard is not the absence of good. Pray without ceasing. Oh my God, yes. Every time you pray, you're aligning your spirit and your life with the kingdom of heaven. Your prayers may not get answered in the way that you'd like them to be answered. But prayer is about like putting your whole life and self into the kingdom of grace, into the vision of Jubilee. See things differently. Sunday for an hour ain't enough, friends. Yeah, I think Angela pointed it out too. My sister says, I need some help knowing other ways besides throwing money at something. I know in my interactions and prayer I'm always practicing, but I mean feet on the ground. I'll give you an example from somebody in our church. They may not know that Sue says be kind to Republicans. That's a truth for her. For some people, it's be kind to Democrats. And in all of us, it's not to lean into either tribe as if it's our home. For Christians, we have no place to call our country at the end of the day, except for the kingdom of heaven. We had a friend in our church who applied to be a part of the Community Corrections Committee in this county. They didn't get in, but you know what they were trying to do? They were trying to get their feet on the ground and plug in locally. At the end of the day, the national stuff matters, the federal stuff matters, but the sausage gets made locally. You see what I just did? The barbecue gets made locally. Be a missionary, a light where you live, work, learn, and play. Be rooted locally. Read about what's happening in your local community. Plug in where you're called. That may just be seeing where you work differently. I mean, teachers, you all are pastors and missionaries. That's been true all along. We're learning it all the more now. But all of you, your jobs, that's your mission field. Your neighborhood is your church, potentially. What injustices are happening in your county? Also, we talked about spheres of influence back in the summer. Like your household. Your first church is with God, but your next church is your household. Pray continuously about how you live for Jubilee there. Your next sphere might be like, who are the next group of people that you're called to be like a companion to? Friends, family. Those critical relationships. The next place might be like, the next sphere is like where you work and play. That's a huge sphere of influence. And then you got like your local, your county, your neighborhood. Like think in terms of spheres of influence. You can't save everything, you can't do everything, but you can do something. Hard is not the absence of good. Something that's hard is discerning. where you follow Jesus in the wasteland and live for Jubilee. I pray that you continue to discern that we continue to discern it together. How together we can follow Jesus, have allegiance to Jesus only, and do concrete things in our households, our workplaces, and our local community to bring the kingdom of heaven to earth.